Hi everyone, I'm Sam. Thanks for joining me for another assembly, looking at what Christians believe and what the Bible teaches. Now, have you ever had to be really brave? I mean really brave. What's the bravest thing that you've ever done? Maybe it's standing up to say something in front of lots of people. Maybe it was when you broke a bone or when you had to have an operation. Maybe it was when you stood up to some bullies. Maybe when you had done something wrong and you needed to be brave to own up to it and say sorry. Throughout life, there are often hard times where we have to make a choice to be brave or not. Making the decision to be brave can be tough. Being brave takes willpower to keep going and strength of character. The more you practice being brave, the braver you become. This is our last video in our Daniel Assembly video series. We've seen how Daniel was taken from his home into captivity. He quickly found himself helping the king of Babylon. He made some very wise choices, even in difficult times, and he was rewarded in life for those good decisions. Do you remember last week we saw the end of Babylon? The Medes and Persians took over. I wonder what happened to Daniel next. Well, some time went by and Darius became the Persian king. He appointed 120 people to rule over different areas of the kingdom of Persia. There would be 3 rulers that would rule over the 120 leaders, and guess who one of them was? Daniel, that's right. Throughout Daniel's life, he had made wise decisions, careful choices, and it always paid off. Now, Daniel was wiser than the other 2 rulers, and King Darius had plans to put him in charge of them all. But this made the other rulers in the kingdom jealous. They started to look for a reason to get Daniel in trouble with the king, so that he wouldn't be given this important job. They looked to see if he was stealing money in his job, but no. They looked to see if he was lazy at his job, but no. They looked to see if he was doing anything wrong so that they could go and tell tales on him. But they couldn't find anything. The only thing they could find that they thought they might be able to use against him was Daniel's faith in God. They thought of a plan. They would make a new law to trap Daniel and to trick the king into making it. Now, when laws were made in Persia, there was a rule that they could never be changed. Once a law in Persia, always a law in Persia. They went to the king. "May King Darius live forever," they said. "All of the rulers in Persia have all agreed that the king should issue a new law that anyone who prays to any god or human being, except you, O king, during the next 30 days, your majesty, well, they shall be thrown into the lion's den. Now, quickly put it in writing so that it can never be changed." It was a trick. All the rulers hadn't come up with this rule, only those that were jealous of Daniel. They knew that the king liked Daniel more than them, and they wanted to get rid of Daniel for good. Surely the king wouldn't listen to this. Oh no, he did! The king believed the lie and agreed. He wrote the new law. For the next 30 days, no one in all of Persia can pray to any god other than the king. If a person does this, they will be thrown into the den of hungry lions. Once a law in Persia, always a law in Persia. When Daniel heard the announcement of this new law, what do you think he did? He could have been scared. He could have tried to run away. He could have had a holiday from talking to God and took a 30-day break. No, not Daniel. As soon as Daniel heard this law, he went straight to his room upstairs, where he would pray every day, and he prayed. He spoke to God about everything that was happening. He thanked God for his great love for him, and he asked him for help. He knew how wonderful it is to talk to God, and nothing in all the world was more important than that. He wasn't afraid of men. He knew that God was far more powerful. He disobeyed the unfair law that the men had made, and he even opened his windows as he did every day, and he looked in the direction of his home city where he'd been taken away from so many years ago. The place where he first got to know God. Who do you think was listening nearby with their ears against the door? Yes, those other jealous rulers were all together as a group when they found Daniel praying. And so they marched off straight to the king, just like little telltales. "Oh, king, do you remember the law that you wrote the other day? Did you not say that if anyone prays to anyone other than you over the next 30 days, that they would be thrown into the lion's den?" The king replied, "Well, yes, and it is a law of the Medes and Persians, so it cannot be changed." "Well, O king, Daniel, who's one of those foreigners from Israel, he is praying to not you, but his God, and not just once, but at least 3 times every day." When the king heard this, he was greatly stressed. He was determined to find a way to set Daniel free. He tried all day to find a way to get around the law he'd written, but it was no use. Once a law in Persia, always a law in Persia. The jealous rulers rubbed their hands together with delight. They whispered to one another, "We've done it! We've got rid of Daniel." They meandered over to the king. "Your king, remember, your majesty. Once a law in Persia, always a law in Persia. It cannot be changed." So the king, filled with sadness, gave the order for Daniel to be thrown into the den of lions. As Daniel was lifted over the pit, the king said, "Daniel, may your God, who I have seen you continually serve, may he rescue you today." Daniel was thrown in, and he was left to die. A stone was placed over the den of lions. Was that the end of Daniel? The king's special seal was placed over the stone so that no one could interfere with the place where Daniel was left to die. The king returned to his palace. He didn't eat all night. He didn't have any entertainment that night. He was terribly worried. Daniel had no doubt told him about his God. King Darius had heard that Daniel's God could do great and mighty things. But could he really rescue Daniel from death by lions? The king couldn't sleep all night. Daniel was going through his mind over and over again. Daniel was so different from anyone he'd ever met. Daniel's God was so different from anyone he ever knew. As soon as the sun started to peek out from the horizon, the king got up. He raced down the stairs out of the palace to the lion's den. When he came near to the den, he called out, "Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God, who you are continually serving, been able to rescue you from the lions and from death?" Daniel called out, "O king, my God has sent his angel to rescue me. He has shut the mouths of the lions. They've not hurt me. I'm innocent. I've done nothing wrong against you, your majesty." The king was overjoyed, and he gave orders for Daniel to be lifted out of the den. No wounds were found on Daniel. The men who had plotted against Daniel were thrown in instead, and they made a very tasty lion's dinner. King Darius came to trust in Daniel's God too, the God who rescues. Daniel was so very brave, wasn't he? He could have done the easy thing and took a 30-day break from praying. No one else would have known, but God would have known. And he was so sure that it was the right thing. He did the right thing even when it was very hard, and it took a lot of bravery. This story reminds me of someone else too, who came later in the Bible. Someone who was completely innocent, yet falsely accused. Someone who had a stone rolled over the entrance to the tomb he was left in, a tomb that was a place for the dead. There was a seal that was also placed over that stone to stop anyone going near it. In the morning, this tomb was looked in also. But we see that he wasn't there anymore. He was no longer dead, but he was alive. A miracle happened and a rescue took place. Who am I talking about? It's amazing that every story in this book, the Bible, secretly whispers his name, Jesus. I wonder this week, how can you be brave? When a difficult situation comes up, think about Daniel being brave and doing the right thing. When you've done something wrong, be brave, do the right thing and own up. When your friends are doing the wrong thing, be brave and do the right thing, and don't just join in because it's the easy option. When you need to do something that you don't feel comfortable doing or something that makes you feel nervous, be brave, don't give up and go for it. Dare to be a Daniel. Thank you for joining me for my series in Daniel. You can read these stories for yourself in the Bible, in the book of Daniel. What do you remember over the last few weeks? What was your favourite story from the book of Daniel? I hope you've learnt some good life lessons, and I hope I get to see you soon. Bye for now.